Help defend the church by becoming a supporter of OnePeterFive. Your tax-deductible contributions make it possible for us to continue our work of informing and inspiring the faithful, of rebuilding Catholic culture and restoring Catholic tradition. Make a real difference. Go to onepeterfive.com/donate today.
You're listening to the OnePeterFive podcast.
It is a real joy for us to welcome you all here. Habemus Papam.
Rebuilding Catholic culture, restoring Catholic tradition.
My guest today is author, speaker, evangelist, and former gay man Joseph Sciambra, whose work includes In the Trenches outreach to the homosexual community in San Francisco in the hopes of bringing the prodigals home. It's incredibly courageous and needed work. Joseph, it's nice to have you back on the podcast.
Thank you, Stephen. God bless you. Thank you.
So I was looking at our podcast statistics a couple days ago, and the last podcast you did with me, the only one you've done with me so far before today, is by far the most popular since we started recording statistics. It's, according to what I was reading, almost 5,000 downloads of just that one episode. So I should have you on more often.
Wow.
Yeah, this is a totally
that's cool.
Cynical ploy on my part. I'm just going to have you on to get the listeners know, but it's really cool because I think the next biggest one we had was a little under 4,000. So
okay,
you're a popular guy, at least in this neck of the woods.
Okay.
So I know that you recently went to the LA Religious Education Congress. So for people who don't know anything about what that is, and I kind of count myself among them, what is it, and what do they do there, and why did you want to go?
Yeah. I wasn't particularly aware of it either because I'm up here in San Francisco and that takes place down in LA. And what it is it's I think it's a 4-day conference. It starts off with a youth day, and they have various speakers. According to the LA Religious Ed Congress, it is the largest gathering of Catholics in the United States. I talked to somebody there.
Wow.
Yeah, I talked to someone there when I was attending, and they said 40,000, at least 40,000 people there. Yeah, and it's a catechetical conference. I say that in quotes. Because what you primarily have there are religious education teachers, DREs, deacons, people involved in religious education. You have just interested people there, but it's primarily people that are involved in religious ed. So presumably these people are going there, once a year, to be informed, to be educated, to become better Catholics, and
right.
so they can educate future generations or people coming into the church through RCIA, whatever. This is the assumption, but the LA Religious Ed Congress has a long history of dissent. They've had James Martin there and various speakers who...
That guy, and he's everywhere right now.
Lately, yeah, he's really jumped on the whole transgender bandwagon. And
yeah, that's one we're going to have to get to. I want to talk to you about that later on.
Yeah, I do too. And so... on that, I'm not really aware of the speakers dealing with other topics. I'm pretty much laser focused just on the LGBT issue. Mm-hmm. So I've been looking for the past few years at the speakers that they've had on that issue, and they've all of them have been people that dissent from church teaching. One particular speaker who's an out and proud gay man has repeatedly said that the teachings in the Catechism of the Catholic Church are wrong. He's gone as far as to say they're gravely evil, that's a quote, and that they need to be changed. But repeatedly, he has been invited back to speak at the LA Congress.
Who is this guy?
His name is Arthur Fitzmaurice. I wasn't gonna say his name because I don't want to give him any more publicity. He's already got.
Sorry, nobody's going to Google it.
So, well, I've written about him on my blog, by name several times, and
I just wanted to make sure he wasn't a member of the clergy.
No, he's a layman.
Okay.
But there were clergy there. Father Brian Massengale, who was there, who's been very dissident on this issue.
Right.
And the thing about this is where it gets complicated, okay? Because Arthur Fitzmaurice is, not just a concerned layperson or somebody that has written about the LGBT issue because, he is gay or, has particular interest in it, which is all true. He is someone who was in charge of the LGBT ministry in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. And that ministry is called the Catholic Ministry for Lesbian and Gay Persons. It is an official ministry within the Archdiocese. They have, their own page on the Archdiocese website. And this is the man who was in charge of it. Now, the current head of the Catholic Ministry for Lesbian and Gay Persons is not much different. He's also spoken out against the Catechism and said it needs to be changed. There was an online petition started by Call to Action, which Call to Action is this wacky fringe Catholic group that wants...
Yeah, are they just like an umbrella group for everything heterodox? I mean, it used to be that they were pushing for other stuff like abortion and women priests, right?
Yes.
Now this is their new thing.
But they still promote those issues too. But several speakers at the LA Congress signed an online petition from Call to Action asking that the Catechism be changed. That included this speaker, who was the former head of the LGBT ministry in LA, the current head of the LGBT ministry, and another one of these speakers at the Congress, unfortunately, who was bilingual and was speaking in Spanish. So it's not bad enough they've corrupted the English speakers.
Yeah.
Now they're going after the Spanish language community. And they're very forthright about it. They're also involved with other fringe groups like Fortunate Families and New Ways Ministry. These are all groups that have no approval from the church because they're so off the mark.
How could they? Yeah.
On the issue. But there's this blending of these officially approved Catholic, quote, ministries within the church, and then these fringe groups, and it's gotten wildly out of control.
I mean, do you get the sense when you're there that this is sanctioned by the bishop? I mean, obviously there are always people who work for the bishop who are going to have their own subversive agenda potentially if you're in a diocese like LA. But I mean, I don't know a lot. It's Gomez, right? Is the Archbishop?
Yes, Archbishop Gomez.
Yeah. I mean, he wasn't going in there known as being crazy, wild, progressive guy, was he?
No.
But I mean, go ahead.
No, actually, he was seen as a ray of light, of hope.
Because, after Mahoney.
Yeah, because things had gotten so wacky there in LA that I think a lot of people had hope. I think the hope is starting to
fade.
It's starting to. I think it's starting to fade. I think the reality is sort of hitting people. And you touched upon something there, because what I did by going to the LA Congress, it's sort of what I do when I outreach to the gay community. I just go out there in the crowd and, I take the signs and I have flyers and I just talk to the people one-on-one. So I had...
Remind the listeners what your signs say.
Well, I don't really have outreach material for the Catholic community because I deal with the gay community usually. So usually I have the shirts and the signs that say Jesus loves gay men, Jesus loves gay women. It sounds very affirmative. So it's sort of
an
like
entree to discussion, basically.
It's a bait and switch, because people could walk up to me and want to talk about it, and then we can get into a further discussion. If people want. Some people just walk away, but it at least gets the conversation going. Mm-hmm. But in LA,
it sounds to me like you should have used those at the Congress. I mean, for goodness sake.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe next year.
I mean, it may not be as overt as the Castro district, but I mean, it's on the path.
It's strange because I talk to people and they're confused because I handed them a flyer and I said, hey, if you're going to the LGBT sessions, read this before, because these people have made public statements that are contrary to Catholic teachings on this subject. So would you please read it? And a lot of people were going to those sessions, and they looked at me, quizzically and said, well, wait, what are you talking about? This is an approved conference. It's a catechetical conference, approved by the the Archbishop was there. And, Bishop Barron was there. And
they don't think any deeper than that. They're just going with, they said it's okay, so it's okay.
And they see 3 or 4 pretty good speakers that are fairly orthodox, So they think, well, hey, everybody here is cool, And it's difficult to explain to people. And I'm saying, well, yes, this is an approved conference, but on this issue, I can't speak about the other ones. These people do not uphold the teachings of the Catholic Church, and people were sort of blown away. They just...
did they look at your stuff, or did they just dismiss you out of hand?
No. A lot of people took it. A lot of people were annoyed at me that I was doing... Here, let me tell you one interesting story. I handed it to one woman, and she was like, okay. And this is out in a big courtyard area in front of the LA... It was at the Anaheim Convention Center. So it was between sessions. So she took it and was reading it, and then I'm handing it out to other people, and she walks back over to me and says, "You know what? They're trying to change the catechism." And I said, "You're exactly right. That's exactly what they're trying to do." And a light went on, and she got it. And
so you kind of just prompted people. I mean, you weren't there to protest. You're kind of like a counterinsurgency, really, in a way. I mean, seeding people with this thought of, hey, go in with a critical mind as opposed to just an open one.
I was trying to inform people, and I did try to talk to religious that were walking in and out. I have an interesting story about a religious. So there was a priest walking into the convention center, and I kind of just stopped everybody. And I said, Father, would you look at this? If you're going to the LGBT sessions, would you look at this ahead of time? And he looked at me and said, well, are you for this or against it? Are you for homosexuality or against it? That's what he wanted to know. And I said, well, Father, I said, you know what? I'm an ex-gay man. And he stopped and he looked at me and gave me the once over and said, get real. And he walked away.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. And I said, Father, hey, I'm real. I'm here. And he walked away and just dismissed me. But I'm kind of used to that. So.
Yeah, but I'm not, and that's awful. I mean, for a Catholic priest to not be happy about that is just, I'm sorry, it's disgusting. There's no other way to put it. Anyway, I'm not going to harp on it. Okay, so
it's par for the. I tell people if you are of sincere heart and you lived the gay life and you are going to the Catholic Church honestly seeking the truth, you are going to be walking through a minefield, because you are going to meet a lot of priests, a lot of religious, and a lot of lay people in charge of these ministries who are going to tell you gay is okay.
Right.
Not all of them, but you're going to meet a lot.
I mean, I know we talked about this last time, but it still floors me.
Oh,
I mean, it floors me that you would get a reaction like that, these these people can't even have the decency to, even if they think that what you are going through or what you've done or you're leaving that whole lifestyle is an anomaly, that they can't be happy that you're happy that you did it.
I was literally thrown out of a Catholic church once. I'm not going to talk about where it was or where the church, but it was before Mass, and the priest saw me and knew who I was, and he told me to leave.
Yeah. Yeah. All are welcome in this place. Isn't that their song that they like?
You know what? The only sin a gay man can commit. Are you there, Stephen?
I am here. I am listening. I muted my microphone because for some reason I suddenly have cement trucks driving by outside and it's noisy. So
I'll repeat this. The only sin a gay man can commit, and a lot of times, and I'll say all of the time, this is also true in these LGBT Catholic ministries. The only sin you can commit is to leave the gay lifestyle. You do that, forget it.
It's crazy. It's ridiculous. I mean, these are priests, and I think so. This speaks to a deeper problem, and we'll touch on it in other areas. This is the tip of an iceberg that is really, really, really huge.
Oh, Stephen, let me tell you this. Let me tell you real quick, because we could spend the whole hour on this. But how I got into this is, I lived in San Francisco when I was in the gay lifestyle, and a couple of times I had spoken to Catholic priests, and they were like, "Oh, Joe, it's okay. You were gay. You were born that way. Just try to temper it a little bit. Watch out. Have safe sex. Try to settle down with one guy, and everything will be fine." That was the advice I got.
And this is multiple priests.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, and I kind of thought that, but friends of mine had that same experience too. But I kind of thought that it was peculiar to San Francisco. I kind of thought that. But I started writing about it a few years ago, about my experience, and then it just opened up a floodgate, and people from all over the United States started writing to me, specifically parents of gay children, or children with same-sex attraction, started writing to me and saying, it's happened in our family, where our son, our daughter got involved in these LGBT ministries at my local parish, and they came out with a boyfriend. They came out waving the rainbow flag at Gay Pride. And these parents were crushed. The saddest letter I ever got was from a woman, a Hispanic lady, very trusting of the church, very trusting of the priests and the local parishes. And she sent her young teenage son to one of these LGBT ministries, and she wrote to me and said, he came out, a confused boy, and he emerged a gay man. Yeah. And what can I say? There's nothing I can say.
I mean, I hate to say this, and I wasn't raised this way, but I think one of the most dangerous things that a Catholic parent can do in 2017 is trust the clergy. You just can't. You can't trust the church like that. I mean, you can trust Christ, and you can trust that he instituted the church and his promises of indefectibility and that the gates of hell will not prevail. But I mean, he didn't warn us about the gates of hell not prevailing because he didn't think it wasn't going to look like it. He knew.
Sadly,
he knew, and that's why he gave us the guarantee.
Sadly, that's true, Stephen, because, being a gay man and, having a very disaffected childhood, when I went to the church, I was sort of looking for a hero. I mean, of course I was looking for our Lord Jesus Christ, but I really looked up to the priests in a sort of strange way. And, they let me down. I mean, one of the first priests that tried to counsel me on this issue ended up making a pass at me. And, I don't know. It's the church has really failed on this issue. I would say, and I shouldn't say the church. Let me qualify that. I think at least the bishops in the United States have really failed massively on this issue. And I'll point to 3 dioceses: Los Angeles, New York, and San Francisco, where they have just really let these LGBT ministries and these parishes that are largely controlled by a gay cabal, they've just let them go out of control. And this is a problem that's been going on for a long time. People don't realize, back in 1986, John Paul and Pope Benedict issued this letter to the Catholic bishops, and people kind of missed the point with that letter, because it was they used the word disordered in terms of same-sex attraction, and people really focused on that.
Right.
And then, of course, that term appeared later in the Catechism. But the major point of that letter, and it was a dead serious letter. It was telling the bishops, get your act together on these gay ministries that are in your diocese. That's what they were saying in that letter. Knock it off. Close them down. Now, what happened after that? Because, and I don't want to bore people with the history of all this stuff, but there was a ministry called Dignity, and they had really set up in a lot of parishes in the major cities, that were near the gay ghettos, like New York, San Francisco, LA. And they had priests that were offering dignity masses. They were essentially, it was a gay mass. Mm-hmm. After that letter, to their credit, most of the bishops threw Dignity out and took them out. But what was strange and what was tragic is the priests that were doing the Dignity masses, and most of the gay advocates that were involved with all that, they just sort of transferred over to another ministry of a different name. You see right. You see what I'm saying? And they were still entrenched in these parishes. So essentially nothing changed. I mean, the organization of Dignity was removed, but all its members and all of those priests that were involved with that stuff, they remained.
Yeah, it doesn't seem at all unrelated to the shifting of abuser priests. I mean, it's the same kind of a thing. It's just, hey, we're just going to move you over here, and you're going to keep doing what you're doing. And I honestly think, I mean, these ministries are the symptom. They are not the cause. The cause is the number of homosexual clergy actively. I've now, doing what I do, I hear from a lot of people from all over the place, and how many people I've heard from who were in seminary and just said it was open and rampant. It was just, the seminaries were inundated with homosexuals, and nobody did anything about it. And if anybody did speak up, they were the ones who got in trouble. It's terrifying. And I'm not just talking about the United States. I mean, people who went to seminary in Rome. I mean, it's systemic. And I don't know how it came about. I mean, there are lots of theories floating out there, and it would be a rabbit hole for this conversation. But I mean, it definitely was something that began, from what I can ascertain, around the 1960s, where this started to be the place to be. If you were gay and you wanted to continue to live that life and have access to other guys, and it was the church. That was where you went, I guess. I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing, because it's sort of antithetical to the whole, message of the Gospels, but there you have it. And it's everywhere.
I had a conversation with a friend of mine who used to work for an archdiocese, and we attended a lecture at a Catholic church by a man who was raised Catholic, but he's become, he sort of started his own religious order. It's bizarre, but he marries gay couples, and he's gay himself. And it's sort of he's sort of a practitioner of this queer theology. So it was bad enough he was speaking at a Catholic parish. So we went, and the things that were discussed were very weird and creepy. And we were leaving, my friend and I, who used to work for an archdiocese. And I said, what's going on here? Because I had complained to the archbishop about this guy being allowed to speak, and well, he spoke anyway. And he said, there are a large number of men in the clergy who are either gay or very sympathetic towards the LGBT, cause. And in the pre-sex abuse scandal, not through any efforts of the bishops, but just because of the lawsuits, that some of those guys were gotten rid of. Mm-hmm. The ones that were abusing boys, teenage boys, they were gotten rid of. The ones that didn't have that inclination are still in the church, and they're causing havoc.
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's very discouraging. So a certain segment of gay clergy, through the boy sex abuse scandal were gotten rid of, but a large number are still there. And I have met some of them, and I have talked to some of them. Some of them, like I said, have come on to me, and it's weird. It's a weird world.
Yeah, it's not a world that I think would be very fun for you.
and unfortunately, these are the priests who are interested in ministering to LGBT people. So they go to the bishops and say, hey, put me in charge of so-and-so parish. Put me in where there's a large gay community. Put me in charge of this ministry. And it becomes toxic, Oof.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's self-serving. It's really frustrating to hear that this is what's going on. But then, you've talked to me in the past about how, there is a natural aversion among straight men to the whole gay culture and everything that has to do with it. So it's normal, I think, in a way, that those priests who have normally ordered sexual appetites are going to look at those ministries and be like, not so sure that I want to do that. On some level, they want to help those people. And I know, Father Paul Scalia was the chaplain for Courage out in the DC area, and he's a man's man. But there are definitely those guys. But for the most part, of course, the guys who are into this are going to be the ones who want to be involved in it. In a way, it reminds me of, there's so many tangents that come off of this topic, but I was involved for years with the Legionaries of Christ. And, over time, I started to see, without really understanding that the founder, Father Maciel, was this horrible sexual predator that he turned out to be. Yeah. I began seeing all the manipulation and the deceit and all the stuff that was going on. And I said, this thing is rotten to the core. There's something really wrong. Like, on the surface, it seemed really orthodox and really good. But the more you dug down, the more you saw things that you just said, these are not Catholic. And over time, I came to realize that all the things that I had suspected and all the things that I began highlighting to my friends and saying, this is dangerous to our faith and to the people that we're working with, they were the mechanisms that were put in place by a predator. He basically created a religious congregation that gave him access to anybody he wanted to abuse. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of see these ministries in a comparable way. You have these guys who are living this lifestyle. They create the ministry. They get access to new people who have the same inclinations. And, it's not necessarily the same in terms of abuse, but it's creating a self-perpetuating thing.
It is self-serving because these priests work out their hostilities and whatever issues they have with the church through these poor people that get involved in these ministries.
And a lot of those people, like you said, they're going because they actually don't want to go down this road. They're trying to find some help.
some people walk in, and I had friends that did this. When I gave up on Christianity and Catholicism altogether, I just gave up on it completely. I just thought it was bogus. But I had friends that, I still had a strong attachment to their Catholic upbringing, and they were trying, in this tortured sort of way to integrate their spirituality with their sexuality. And in these ministries and in these parishes, they found a way to do it. It wasn't an authentic way to do it, but they did it they weave an odd tale. They reinterpret the scripture, and it just becomes very sick, and I want to say this too, it's not just the diocese. Certain religious orders have really taken this on as part of their charism. Of course, the Jesuits, the Paulist Fathers, who have a very loathsome LGBT ministry out of St. Paul the Apostle parish in Manhattan called Out at St. Paul. I would say it's the worst in the United States. Wow. It's blatant. It's awful. It's terrible. And then, of course, the missionaries of the Precious Blood, who were inexplicably given control over Most Holy Redeemer in the Castro in San Francisco.
What an irony, just on a superficial level, to hear words like the Most Precious Blood and Most Holy Redeemer associated with people who are doing the worst abuses. It really, it's satanic.
It is. It is. The mission, and I've written again on this on my blog. The missionaries of the Precious Blood have been very clear on their stance on homosexuality, and it in no way is in line with Catholic teaching. It's contrary to it.
I want to touch on this again, but before we do that, I'm going to do that a little bit later on. I want to return you back to the Congress. I've heard, it's been reported that Father Brian Massengale in particular was using Amoris Laetitia as sort of a touch point for some of his arguments. We know, because we're reporting on it all the time in terms of what it's doing to the idea of marriage, sexuality, adultery, reception of the sacraments, all of that it's sowing a lot of confusion. But were you there for that presentation? Do you think he was exploiting this and twisting it even beyond its obvious problematic content, or was he kind of just using it the way that it was written?
I didn't go to the presentations. I was outside talking to the folks, walking in and out. But I did talk to people that went to some of them, and then I did specifically the ones by Mr. Fitzmaurice were attended, strongly by people from these LGBT ministries, and I did read what they had to say about it, and which was interesting.
There's a lot of concern, we've done hundreds now of articles on the fallout from this document. And there is a lot of concern out there that the subtle sort of undercurrent behind this redefinition of marriage and really of objective existence of grave sin in the realm of sexuality in particular, is aimed at sort of an ultimate rehabilitation of some sort of Catholic approved sanctioned homosexual relationship. That many of the clergy, and the bishops in particular, or cardinals who are driving this, they want normalization of this, at least in part because some of them are participating in it.
Okay. Let me tell you something. Now, because I've seen a lot of lay people get worked up about Amoris Laetitia. Okay. But this is the reality. There are spaces in the Catholic Church, let's just call them approved, because these are not fringe, these are not people that have left the church. There are Catholic parishes controlled by dioceses, ministered to by religious orders, the Jesuits, where this is already a reality, okay? Yeah. That's what I tell people, because they're so, but it's already, this is, Pandora's box has already been opened. Let me just give you an example of a parish. The entire pastoral council of the parish is run by either out gay men or partnered homosexuals. They perform marriage blessings there. It's no big deal. Everybody knows what's going on. Everybody walks up to the Blessed Sacrament, receives communion, and this has been going on for a long time.
But I know you're face to face with that world all the time. But for the rest of us, for those of us who don't voluntarily go into those environments, we're trying to get our families to the best parishes we can all the time. That kind of stuff. What winds up happening is we're used to having some knowledge in the back of our head that this is a reality, but we perceive it as an abuse. But what's happening now is it's like the gangrene that had made it into the toes, is now spreading up to the heart and to the head. And that's what's freaking people out is, okay, that we used to be able to point at that and say, that's not right. That's an abuse. That's an anomaly. How come the bishop's not doing something about that? Now it's top down, and you have the Pope and Rome saying, hey, this is all fine. And these people that you're talking about who were sort of sequestered away in their own little ghettos, they're in ascendancy now. And they're coming right out into the open and saying, see, we've waited and now it's our time. And that's scary.
I get your point. I've always just been it's always been curious to me, the official teachings of the church on, let's just, stick to homosexuality in theory and in practice. And it's two different things, because the catechism and the official documents on homosexuality are extremely explicit and clear. But when you get down to the parish level, there's no resemblance between the two at all. It's like the other doesn't exist. So,
that's definitely true in some parishes. I would definitely say that in others it's not, and you and I have talked before about, obviously for a decade, I've been going to parishes with the traditional Latin Mass. When you go to the places where there's more liturgical orthodoxy,
of course,
you're getting that same kind of teaching from the pulpit and in the confessional, etc.
But here's what I'm saying. The gay community is extremely small. I know they throw out these inflated numbers like 10%, all this stuff.
Right, but it's 3, right?
I would say gay men are about 2, and women are about 1. So it's about 3. So it's extremely small. And of those who are interested in Catholicism, I mean, come on, is extremely minuscule. So you're dealing with very few people going to very few ministries, very few parishes in very specific places. And all of those ministries and parishes are horrible.
Right.
So I don't think it doesn't come up that much in your local parish unless it's in confession or something. But where you have large communities of gay people, like in those major cities, it's a big mess.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. And, we're not moving in the right direction on it. This is an authoritative church. If it's not coming from the top down, it's not going to happen at all. Let me move on, because I know we'll stay on this forever, and I do want to touch on an article that we had discussed earlier. But you had mentioned transgenderism. I know that it came up at the Congress. This is a thing that seems to all of a sudden be having its heyday. I don't really know why it's been thrust to the forefront. I mean, you talk about, okay, I want to hear it, but I mean, you talk about the homosexual community being maybe total men and women 3% of the population. When it comes to transgenderism, it's like 0.03%. Yeah. I mean, it's even smaller, but now this is like the big dog is being wagged by this little tail, and I don't know why. What's going on with this?
Okay. outside of the church, just speaking culturally, know what really informed me on this issue is, and I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but it's called the otherkins phenomena. Do you know what otherkins?
Sounds vaguely familiar, but I can't say I could define it for you. I think I've heard of it before, though.
Okay. Otherkins is just
I do spend a lot of time on the internet, so I mean, you never know what you're going to run into.
Okay. I encountered, well, okay, let me backtrack. I outreach in San Francisco, and I outreach at Pride, which for most people is incredibly shocking. Like I've done it for several years, and I've never had a repeat volunteer.
That doesn't surprise me. I'm just going to throw it out there. Not a surprise.
I'll tell you why. Because all of my volunteers are straight, Catholic, solid, conservative, Orthodox people. But they really want to go and help, and they like what I do. But none of them have ever come back, and they've all said, "I just can't handle it. It's too gross. It's too It's too vulgar," and I get it. But the Pride is pretty vanilla compared to the other sex fairs. I go to the Folsom Street Fair.
Send your kids out of the rooms, everyone.
No, I'm not going to say anything. I go to the Folsom Street Fair. I go to the Dory Alley Street Fair. And what these are is they close off certain streets in San Francisco. And they set up... Most of this is sponsored by the BDSM and the leather community, all the bondage stuff,
It's so nice that we have all these communities around such horrible things. We're a community of people who beat our dogs. It's fine.
Okay.
It's a community.
It is a community. So it's a sick community, but it's a community.
Yeah, it is.
So they do demonstrations. People, to make a long story short, it's predominantly gay men, but women are more there now. But the people have sex, all sorts of sex, intercourse on the street in front of people. It's crazy. What I noticed the last couple of years, and I had never noticed this when I was in the life back in the 90s, but there are people that take on the, I don't know what you would call it, they take on this sort of avatar of non-humans, dogs, pigs, fairies, vampires, demons. They dress like them. They act. At a point it becomes very degrading, where people that take on the dog persona are led around on leashes and have collars and drink out of dishes and everything on the street, and it's this big spectacle that they put on. And I was curious about this, and I talked to people, and I said, and they said this is part of this otherkins movement, where you don't just have people who, like, say, a man who then identifies as a woman, but you have human beings who identify as these creatures. And I started thinking about this, and what I saw there with these people that were taking on these personas, what it looked like to me was diabolical possession. What they were exhibiting, because if you read books about exorcisms and priests who have done exorcisms, is oftentimes people are possessed not just by demonic entities, but demonic entities which exhibit these animal behaviors like barking and squealing. And I talked about this a little bit in my book, because there was this weird sort of convergence sometimes in male homosexuality, where people were called pigs and all this stuff, and sex pigs and all this stuff. And it sounds like weird sort of kinky talk, but it gets deeper than that, where people start taking on those spirits, as
it's like a complete alienation from their humanity. I mean, they're degraded to the point where they lose the sense that they're in the image and likeness of God.
Yes. And this is where it informed me with this whole transgender issue, because I think that's where it's going, to the sort of otherkins phenomena, where it just doesn't stop. It's sort of the legitimization or the legal rights of demonic entities. It sounds bizarre.
No, that doesn't sound bizarre. That sounds perfectly appropriate.
Okay.
No, that's what's going on. I mean, look, this is a friend said to me recently. I was never a reader of H.P. Lovecraft. I like science fiction, and I kind of come across these concepts of Lovecraft in other books. It's become kind of popular again. But this is classic horror science fiction, century old. And this person said to me, what it was about Lovecraft that made the stories terrifying. It wasn't so much the monsters, the elder gods, these giant octopus things, whatever, that came from space. It was that the entire thing was so surreal that it made you lose your sense of the objectivity of reality. Nothing made sense. Logic was thrown out the window. Things that weren't supposed to be able to happen could happen. And it created this surreality that sort of unmoored you from the real world. And I feel like that's kind of the thing. Like that is the ethos. We are so anti-rational now. All this stuff that's going on, I mean, what is it that makes us in the image and likeness of God? That we have an intellect and a free will, that we can make these choices and that we can move toward the good. That's what's being attacked. Like at a fundamental level, our humanity is being stripped away from us by saying, I'm a man, but I'm a woman. I'm a woman and I'm marrying the Eiffel Tower. There's all this bizarre, I mean, you see it constantly in the news, these bizarre people. It's not just transgender. Now it's trans age. I'm a 13-year-old girl in the body of a 50-year-old man. Really? It doesn't make any sense at all.
No. And I don't want to forget the issue of mental illness here, because
no, I think that's important.
Because mental illness within the LGBT community has always been higher than in the straight community, and scientists, they know this. What they try to do, and they do this even at the CDC, what they try to do is they say, well, these disparities, and they're clear and they're undeniable, these disparities are due to societal homophobia. But what some researchers have done is they've got, specifically to the Netherlands, which has a long history of LGBT affirmation and rights, and these disparities still exist there. And in the transgender community, they're even higher than in the gay and lesbian community. And
people don't realize how much. I mean, I was talking to a friend recently who had to review a study, a long-term study that was done on the transgender phenomenon. And he told me that the attempted suicide rate for those who identify as transgender is about 40%. Now, last year, America allegedly hit a 30-year high on suicides. So the actual suicides committed, and suicide attempts are always higher. The actual suicides committed, according to the New York Times, was 13 out of every 100,000 people, which is a little more than 0.1%. So compare 0.1% of actual suicides to the figure for attempted suicides that I looked up was something like, I think it was 0.6% in the general population. So 40% of the transgender community is attempting suicide. And these are voluntarily reported data. I mean, this is not, everybody who tries to commit suicide isn't going to tell you. These are the people who said, all right, I admit it. I tried to do this. The other thing that my friend told me was that there's a much, much higher likelihood, like multiple hundreds of % higher likelihood that they will be successful in those attempts. Whereas for an average person, if they try to commit suicide, a lot of times they don't really want to succeed. There's that subconscious holding back, like I'm going to screw this up because what I really want is help. But in the transgender community, they are exponentially more likely to succeed because that's how deeply they feel this misery. And so I do think it's more than a moral crisis. It's a mental health crisis.
Yes. Yes.
And you've got these parents now who are pushing their little kids to do this. And, I read this article the other day about this mom who started buying dresses for her son just, to make sure he had all of his options on the table. And he's a kid who's like 5. And, I have 4 boys, ages 10 down to age 4. One just had a birthday. Boys will pretend all day long. And if they don't have any boundaries and nobody's telling them that it's weird. Now, boys do tend to naturally do things like pick up a Barbie doll by the head and use it as a sword. There's sort of a thing. Like, they're kind of warriors from birth. But I mean, they'll put on costumes and they'll play and they won't think anything of it. But if they're getting positive attention from their mother when they're putting on the green sparkly dress, and they're just thinking of it as make-believe, that gets reinforced until a point where now that kid's 12 and they're saying that they're a girl. And I think it's a form of abuse. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, there's a whole weird dynamic there. I call them transgender stage parents.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It's just like the pageant moms.
It is. There's odd stuff going on there. They're getting some sort of fame, attention. It's almost like Munchausen by proxy.
Yeah.
It's where the parent is getting attention because
through the child. Yeah.
Yes, because the child has this unique. I see it with these LGBT ministries too. It's typically the mother. Where are the dads? I mean, I know we've talked about this. The dads are always the problem in these situations anyway. Yes. Yes.
Even if it's just by their absence, they're the problem.
Yes.
I have to tell you, I'm still bad because I work too much and all this stuff. But ever since the last time I talked to you, I think about it so much more often. I'm like, am I ignoring my boys? What attention do I need to give them? I think as guys, we need to be aware that we play a critical role here in teaching our boys to be men and teaching our daughters what to expect from their men. But when I hear, that these moms are doing this and the dads are sitting back and letting them, I mean, the dad's not out of the picture. He's just, whatever, honey. I want to punch those guys in the face.
Half of marriages end in divorce too. So, there's already a dysfunctionality there. This is where people really challenge me on. There's a lot of data here. It's all on my website about the bad relationships between gay men and their fathers. Mm-hmm. And this is the argument people will throw at me. Well, if every man who had a bad relationship with his father turned out gay, all men would be gay. And right. I go, and I go back to the very small percentage of the population who are gay men. Not everybody, and this is sort of basic psychology, not everybody is going to react to stress or trauma in the same way.
True. And not everybody has the same factors. I mean, there's other factors.
Right.
Aren't there?
Yeah. And yes. But those who swerve towards homosexuality, it's a rather rare case. I mean, many more men get into alcoholism. Many more men get into porn addictions. Okay? So not all guys that have bad relationships with their dad are going to be gay, but some of them are. And I've met them, and they all had bad relationships with their dads, and then something weird happened with the mother, usually where the mother became overprotective and facilitating and
I was going to ask you about that, because that's also, from what I've read, that's a big thing, is the overbearing mom, or the mom having the dominant influence in the son's life.
Yes.
And so because there's all this patterning that goes on in childhood, and when that's the alpha in the family, there's something going on there.
Yeah. It was always sort of a joke when I was in the life and I lived in San Francisco, and San Francisco is a weird place, especially in the gay community. Is most of the guy, I was sort of the strange fella that was actually born and raised there. Most of them were from other parts of the country.
Right.
So yeah,
like
so
the gay
when
Mecca, they all make a joke.
It just brings everybody there. And when it was always a joke when somebody's family member would come to visit. It was never dad. It was always mom. It was always sister. It was always cousin. And I didn't have that dynamic with my family because I wasn't really particularly. I mean, my dad specifically rejected the lifestyle that I was in, so I wasn't.
And you give him credit for that, if I recall. Right?
Thank God.
That was the thing that actually helped you to come home in the end, wasn't it? That he said, no, you got to take this somewhere else.
I laugh about it now, but at the time it was very upsetting. I came home certain times with lots of tattoos and lots of body piercings and stuff. And this is in the early 90s when people didn't do that,
Right.
And sometimes, well, I shouldn't say sometimes. One time I brought some friends with me, and they were just like me, freaky. And my dad said, "Don't you ever." My mom was just sort of, I don't know. Moms, love their kids and love their sons.
Sometimes a little too unconditionally. Yeah. Let's just put it out there. Sometimes it's a little too permissive.
Yeah. And my mom saw me struggling. It was just like, oh my gosh, what's he doing? But she didn't know what to do, and she didn't know what to say. She just, prayed and was like freaked out by it. But my dad was just like, don't you ever bring these people here again. And for a lot of gay people, that's sort of the litmus test. If you reject my friends and you reject what I'm doing, F you, I'm out of here. And that was the best thing my dad could have done for me.
Was there a point where he said to you, it's one thing to say, don't bring those people around here. It's another thing to say to you, as long as you're going to continue to associate with those people and live that life, don't you come around here either. Did it come to that point?
Yes. Yeah, because it was, I made it clear that, if they were part of the bargain.
Yeah.
If you reject them, you reject me. So, adios.
Right.
But that, again, it's like the prodigal son, and I tell parents this all the time. The best thing you can do a lot of times is just say goodbye to your kid. Now, that's rough, and I'm not a parent, and I guess it's kind of easy for me to say. But I've just seen where families that are dysfunctional and where they don't so much accept it and march with the kid at Gay Pride and with PFLAG and everything, but they just kind of keep quiet about it, and that's not good.
I think it's analogous. It's not even just that. It's the kid that the daughter that runs off and gets pregnant and is with a guy that's bad for her. There comes a point where I think parents have to do that thing where they say, if you're going to keep doing this, I can't continue to be a part of it. I can't welcome you into the home and pretend like everything's normal until you're going to start making some positive changes in your life. Otherwise, you're going to get the impression that I'm okay with what you're doing, and I'm not.
Okay. Well, this is the conversation I have with parents of same-sex attracted kids. They say to me, well, my son doesn't get involved with this stuff. He is partnered, or he's looking for a partner.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm just like, it is naive, and this is a bomb I like to drop on people sometimes, is that the highest rates of HIV infection in the gay community are not among single men. They're among partnered guys that are in so-called monogamous relationships. That's where you are more likely, if you're a gay man, to contract HIV from your husband or boyfriend than from a stranger.
And what is the reason for that? Is it because the monogamy is not?
It is not. And there's been surveys done and studies done specifically in San Francisco that look at these relationships, these so-called monogamous relationships. And what they have found out is it's a type of negotiated monogamy. Mm-hmm. It's conditional, where, and they found that over half of these are that way, that the men are, to a certain degree, are exclusive. And I got into it with guys like this. They say they're emotionally monogamous, but that they don't fall in love with somebody else. But that at certain points in the relationship, they will either have sex with somebody else or they'll bring in a third person.
Right.
And that's where it happens. So,
we're coming up on
they're not protected.
I was just going to say, we're coming up on the hour, but if you're okay, I have control over how long we go, and this always happens with you. I'm noticing a pattern. We have so much to talk about, but I do have more I want to talk to you about. Can you stick around?
We didn't get to the homoerotic altar.
Oh yeah,
fresco.
no. Yeah, we've got to get to the homoerotic altar fresco. That's coming up in a little bit. Just hold on. We'll get to that. So I want to ask you, though, about something that I think a lot of people I know have actually been curious to get your perspective on, and that is the whole Milo Yiannopoulos fiasco.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So, for people who don't know, Milo Yiannopoulos is this very openly, flamboyantly gay man who is also very conservative on a number of issues. He's a British guy. He's devastating in terms of his ability to debate. His rhetoric is practically flawless. He goes on all these shows. He takes feminism apart. He actually has debated Boy George, saying that gay marriage shouldn't be allowed. Even as a gay man, he's saying, hey, gay marriage is wrong. He's made arguments that the Catholic Church, which he is supposedly, was raised at least partially, and he's ethnically Jewish. There's some questions about, how involved he is in the church. But I've heard from a lot of people who say that he is or embraces Catholicism, at least on some level, and he defends the Catholic Church and its teachings, despite going around acting, very, very, very queen. His tour that he's gone on to colleges is called the Dangerous Faggot Tour. He doesn't hold back on this aspect of his life. And if you watch videos of him over the years, you see this increasing flamboyance. He was much more reserved when he was writing for the Catholic Herald 4 years ago, whenever it was, than he is now. But he's gotten himself into trouble because as his profile has grown, and he's a big provocateur. He considers himself a professional troll. He offends people because he believes that if everyone is going to go around crying about being offended, then they deserve to be. And so that's kind of what he does. And he most recently worked as the senior tech editor for Breitbart News, which is the third biggest news website in the world. And he takes on a lot of interesting issues. Like he says lesbians don't exist, and he goes after the transgendered people and cites, the Dr. Paul Mcqueen from Johns Hopkins, who called transgenderism a mental disorder. He does all this stuff that people wouldn't necessarily expect him to do. He even says that if he could be straight, he would like to be. He says he won't adopt a child because he believes that, as a gay man, he couldn't give that child what they need from a mother and father. All this stuff. And so nobody seems to know how to take him. And the left has grown increasingly angry. For a while, being gay was his shield. And in a way, I think that's why he played it up as much as he did, is that it was the shield. He's a protected class. We can't go after him, but he's saying all these things that we don't like. Well, finally, somebody decided, among the quote unquote conservatives to out some, you can't really out this guy because he's in public on all this stuff, but found some old podcast interviews that he had done. And in these podcast interviews, he talks about defending sexual relationships between adolescent boys, 13, 14 years old, and adult men. And in one conversation in particular on a podcast that I really wouldn't recommend anybody go back and listen to, it's very crass, very vulgar. It's called Drunken Peasants, but this was the one, and it got him in the most trouble. Here's what he said. I just want you to listen to this, and then I want to ask you about it.
And the reason these age of consent laws exist is because we have to set some kind of a barometer here. We've got to pick an age and go, okay, look, this is the age where we can reasonably be assured you're an adult, you can give informed consent, you understand the risks and pregnancy risks. And I think
the law is probably about right. That's probably roughly the right age. I think it's probably about okay. But there are certainly people who are capable of giving consent at a younger age. I certainly consider myself to be one of them. People who are sexually active younger. I think it particularly happens in the gay world, by the way. And in many cases, actually, those relationships with older men. This is one of the reasons I hate the left. They have this sort of stupid, one-size-fits-all policing of culture. This sort of arbitrary
Milo.
This arbitrary.
Let him talk.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll be quick. This arbitrary and oppressive idea of consent, which totally destroys, the understanding that many of us have of the complexities and subtleties and complicated nature of many relationships. People are messy and complex, and actually, in the homosexual world particularly, some of those relationships between younger boys and older men, the sort of coming-of-age relationships, the relationships in which those older men help those young boys to discover who they are and give them security and safety and provide them with love and a reliable and sort of a rock where they can't speak to their parents.
So Milo then goes on. I cut the audio there. He goes on to make a very inappropriate joke about a sexual liaison with a priest he had when he was very young, because one of the podcast interviewers said that sounds like priest sexual abuse to me. And this is his thing. Milo uses what he says is gallows humor, and that's how he deals with it. Well, when the controversy really blew up, he comes back to these comments and later asserted that what he actually experienced was sexual abuse, but that I think the way he phrased it was that the reality of this abuse was complicated by the fact that he didn't see it that way at the time, that he wanted it. And he also said, in retrospect, that he thinks he could have given consent at the age when he was. Within 24 hours of this coming out, another tape comes out of George Takei, openly gay actor, on the Howard Stern show years ago, talking about his first sexual experience being with a camp counselor who was like 18, 19 years old, and George was 13 or 14. Again, same thing. He's asked the question, do you think it's molestation? He says, no, I wanted it to happen. I was attracted to this guy. How common is this in the gay world? I mean, this is blown up like advocation of pedophilia, but it really seems like it's more complicated than that. And it's like suddenly the covers have been thrown back and we're seeing this thing that's more common than people think.
Okay, well here, let me give you a study here. And this is a legitimate study. It was published in the Archives of Sexual Behavior. And they found that 46% of homosexual men and 22% of homosexual women reported having been molested by a person, and here we go, a person of the same gender, okay? Mm-hmm. This contrasts with only 7% of heterosexual men and 1% of heterosexual women who reported being molested by a person of the same gender. That's pretty significant. Significantly
higher.
Yeah, crazy.
And from your own life, anecdotally, you went into these bars, you talked to these people. This is a pretty common thing, right?
Okay, well, I wrote about this a lot in my book. There is a certain niche, and it's a pretty big niche. There's a niche sort of fetish within, I'm not going to be explicit, within the gay male world specifically that caters to this. It's a daddy culture. Mm-hmm. The biggest genre in gay male porn, and it's pretty much always been this way, more so now, and there's reasons for that, is these daddy themes. And what you have in these daddy themes films is you have an older man, 40s, 50s, sometimes older than that, usually sort of stereotypically masculine. And what they'll do is they'll pair that person with what we would call a twink in the gay world. It's a young, slender, barely legal guy. Mm-hmm. Sometimes in the sort of plots in these films where there's a plot, it becomes very sick, and it's a father and a son. Right. Or it's an uncle and a nephew, or like a camp counselor and a Boy Scout or something.
And it's going back to that thing we were talking about earlier of the failure to connect with the father, and then it becomes distorted into this weird thing. Yeah,
it's dealing with the trauma, mm-hmm. and I hate to say this, but, it happened to me, is that, and this is just sort of how, it's just sort of the way it goes about. And people argue with me on this point, is when a young guy goes into the gay world, you are typically ushered in and initiated, usually, gently at first. You're initiated into the world of all male sex. It's like I was an 18, 19-year-old kid walking into San Francisco not knowing much. And you've got these guys, a lot of times handsome, successful, whatever, and they come on to you and they want to be with you, and your whole life you were alienated. And relating this to the Milo situation, he talked about having a troubled relationship with his father and a kind of an odd relationship with his mother. So
his dad sounds like he's basically like a mafia guy. He's this really hardcore Greek, runs these nightclubs, and just a guy that you don't mess with kind of guy, and you could just see the aloofness in the way he's described.
Yeah, my heart went out to him. And when you're in those situations, it's great, because you have to pay later down the road. But here you're a boy that perhaps didn't get along with his dad, or got teased, or was a sissy, or whatever. And then you've got men that want to be, it's like it's a dream come true, So
okay, but you say you go into this scene at 18, but he's talking 13, 14.
Okay. Okay. If you just want to look at the porn, I'm sorry. If you just want to examine or talk about the porn,
phenomenon
as an example, you have these scenarios where the young men look much younger. Okay. So it's sort of like mock kiddie porn.
Right.
Okay. Now there's a figure in gay history. He's an icon. He is a gay icon. His name is Harry Hay. And people from the LGBT world know who he is right away. He's one of the very first gay advocates, and he supported this. There was weird going back and forth in the early gay rights movement between these people and NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association. It's just clear. Now Harry Hay spoke at a NAMBLA conference, and so did Dr. Frank Kameny. Now, Dr. Frank Kameny was honored by Obama. Kameny's dead, but in 2010, Kameny was in the White House and was honored by President Obama. And both of these men had strange sort of intersections with NAMBLA. Now, and this is what Harry Hay said. And when I heard all this uproar about Milo, I was like, come on, this stuff has been in the gay scene for years. This is what
Not just for years, for centuries. Go back to Sparta. This isn't new, and I'm not advocating for it, but I'm just saying.
But that's a different scene. There you had men that weren't exclusively homosexual. It was because a lot of gay advocates will say, well, what about Greece and all this stuff? That was different. The phenomena of men who are exclusively homosexual is a modern phenomena. Those guys doing that stuff, there was this pederasty going on, right. But it was different. It had a different dynamic to it. But here's what Harry Hay said. If the parents and friends of gays are truly friends of gays, they would know from their gay kids that the relationship with an older man is precisely what 13, 14, and 15-year-old kids need more than anything else in the world. Mm. And this is a gay icon that you would study in queer theology and all this stuff, and queer theory and all. So, so it's an old story. And I'm sort of shocked that people are shocked that, Milo had kind of a rotten childhood, because if you let's just look at two celebrities that don't seem particularly related except that they're LGBT. You have Ellen DeGeneres, who talked about being molested rather brutally by her stepfather, and then you've got Lee Daniels, the director, who talked about the violent, ugly relationship with his father. And then I was just reading about the British designer Alexander Mcqueen. People might remember him because he was very famously associated with Lady Gaga and was so instrumental in her, image and becoming famous. And it just came out recently that he was terribly sexually abused as a child. So it's an undercurrent of mental illness. It goes back to all this stuff, this undercurrent of mental illness, abuse, trauma, family dysfunction, and codependency that goes on in all these families. And people are surprised by it, but I'm not.
I mean, and the thing is, there's this weird, especially because Milo kind of became associated as a figure of the right. And which is sort of a weird thing in and of itself because of how openly and flamboyantly he was a homosexual. But because he was a champion of so many things that your average Catholic in the pew could agree with, he kind of came under a different sort of scrutiny. And then when this comes out, there's this moral outrage. Now, I will admit that their moral outrage seems as though it is due to any kind of situation of, this would be not pedophilia, but ebophilia, basically, adolescent boys, which is, again, another huge tangent would be where the majority of the sex abuse crisis in the church came in. These were not prepubescent boys, they were adolescent boys. And there is a distinction that's made here that ties it back into the homosexual community. What were you going to say?
And how problematic is it that Milo was sort of initiated into this world by a Catholic
by a priest? Yeah. I mean, if his story is true, then that's where it came from, and that's horrifying. So the weird thing for me is, on the one level, yes, there should be moral outrage. I think there would be, though, more moral outrage if this was a 30-something-year-old man talking about positive relationships with a 13 or 14-year-old girl. Yeah. And that's because that's not the normal thing. But because for the homosexual world this is a normal thing, it's almost like, yeah, it's ugly, but I mean, are you really surprised? This isn't a new thing. This has been going on forever. And normalization, I think normalization in terms of experience, when you're in an environment, in a community where people think that this is normal, you're a lot less likely to look at it as abnormal.
I don't think the gay left was outraged by. I sort of monitored the very passively though, but I sort of monitored the gay press after that Milo thing, and I mean they largely didn't even report on it.
Oh, really?
If they didn't,
sort of opportunistic. It was political.
Yeah, I think they already didn't care for him. I think it was just another way to sort of make fun of him. But I don't think there was any sort of outrage there. The outrage was coming from the conservative right. And that's sort of interesting too. I think that speaks more towards conservatives than it says towards liberals. That I think.
Well, I think a lot of them felt uncomfortable with him sort of becoming an icon of their political persuasion. And this was an opportunity to throw him under the bus and get rid of him. I mean, really. I mean, and frankly, he is. He's a dangerous guy to have on your side because, he's not a moral guy. He's not advocating morality in some ways. In other ways, he's saying, don't live like me. There's sort of this Oscar Wilde dynamic there. I mean, not that he's, of that caliber, but I mean, a really smart guy, very articulate. This is what the church teaches and I think it's right, but I can't do it. I just can't live up to that standard.
I thought it was interesting, though, the conservatives were shocked because it sort of speaks to how much perhaps they, even subconsciously, have bought into the gay narrative that homosexuality and heterosexuality are no different. Right. That it's just different variations. And I think what the Milo thing revealed is that there is something odd going on in the gay male psyche that deserves that deserves to be examined.
Well, so I want to talk to you about that. So there's two things that I kind of drew out of this. One is, psychologists will tell you that sometimes there's this kind of hypersexualization that happens when children are abused, right? It doesn't always happen. Sometimes they become very reticent and they stay away from all of it. But others will actually become more promiscuous.
Oh, yeah.
I've experienced this. I've known young women who were abused, and they were very, very affectionate to a point where it was like, hey, stop. Girls that I dated. And I didn't find that out until later, but it was like, okay, connecting the dots here. So I read up on that. But I mean, do you think that for people like Milo and George Takei, when they're talking about these childhood experiences positively, are they kind of rationalizing the abuse? Is that a possibility, do you think?
Yeah.
Because you're 13, 14. How do you, I mean, at the time, that's got to be kind of scary, I would think. I wouldn't have been ready for anything at that age.
Well, it happened to me too. And when you get into the gay community, you're with people that have had a lot of the same experiences. So it seems normal when you talk to other guys that say, well, yeah, I was messing around as a 13 and 14-year-old boy. And suddenly that sort of maybe shame that you had about that, or that uncomfortable feeling that, that you carried around about that is sort of gone. Right. Because you're with other people that had the same experiences. And it doesn't make that violation of you okay. But it's sort of in your head. It makes
like you begin to turn it into a positive experience.
Yeah. I don't know, positive or just benign, or just is it was what it was. Because again, you're with so many other people that had the same experience. So, it's odd. I mean, and that's what the gay community is. It's a refuge for people that have been traumatized and abused and alienated. And they just get together and they have sex with each other in sort of this attempt to heal these wounds. There's rampant disease, there's mental illness, and it's just what it is.
It's a dead end on every level.
It is. And I guess people outside are looking into it and trying to figure it out. But you just really can't, you can't. I think you started to go down this road, but do you see it as a positive thing that with Milo under attack and under scrutiny for this, it kind of seems like now people are asking bigger questions about why there's so much of this intergenerational thing going on? Does this have the potential to help expose the problem, or, is it just going to blow over and then it's back to promoting the agenda as usual? I think in the culture now, I think it's going to be forgotten fairly soon. I
mean, I almost feel like we're already there. It happened like a week ago.
Yeah.
And I felt like bringing it up with you today is almost a little bit stale. It's out of the news cycle.
Right. You're right. It's kind of old news, So, I mean, things move fairly quickly. And it's just par for the course. This stuff just goes on. I speak specifically again with mothers whose sons have, moved down to San Francisco as young kids, teenage boys, and they're involved with older men a lot of times who treat them like a sugar daddy, who treat them very well. And, mom's telling me about this stuff, and I'm just like, it happened to me 30 years later. It's still happening.
How old were you?
When I went to San Francisco?
No, I mean, you had an experience before that, you said, right?
I did. I was pretty young. I was about 8 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's even worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not something that anybody looks at as a positive thing.
No. But, when I got in, coming out and getting into the gay scene, I guess in my head, it made sense, I don't
you feel
know.
like it was part of what led you there?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm probably very subconsciously, but.
Yeah, I mean, I was also heavily involved in pornography as a kid too. So, I had a lot of weird stuff going on. I had that violation, and then I had a lot of pornography.
Which, I don't want to go way down that road, but I mean, we're of the generation, I'll be 40 this year. I don't know how old you are, but I mean, we're of the generation where so you couldn't get pornography when we were kids. It's not like you could just open up your phone and 2 clicks and you're there. You had to go buy it, or somebody you knew had to have it.
Yeah. Well, everybody in my circle of friends, we all had older siblings, and we all had access to it.
That's why.
In magazines.
Because there was always the kid at school whose dad had a stack that he would steal and bring them in. And
one of my best friends had a lot of that stuff. And then I had an older brother who had a lot of porno. And then, but then I was a teenager during the VCR revolution, which was huge. So, you at that point you could.
There was a lot of unregulated stuff you could.
Oh yeah, so if you had like a porno magazine, a hardcore one, you could order VHS tapes through the mail, and I did it as like a 13-year-old boy. Man. So at that point, I had hardcore, and then I got hardcore gay porn too. So messed me up.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, thank God that you were brought out of it and brought home. Let me transition here. So I want to go back to what we were going to talk about from the article. So I sent you this article this morning from LifeSite News about Archbishop Paglia. I almost wanted to call him Camille Paglia. There's a Freudian slip for you. But so Paglia, who is the new head of the Pontifical Academy for Life, appointed by Pope Francis, and I believe also now heading up the John Paul II Institute for Marriage and Family in Rome. But in this article, it says how in 2007, he commissioned a homosexual artist to paint a homoerotic mural in his cathedral church back, like I said, in 2007, so 10 years ago.
Wow.
And there's some pictures of the mural, and I don't know if you got to look at them, but I mean, they're sorted. I mean, the art isn't even good. Let's be honest. The art's crappy. It's terrible. But what it shows, it's just not aesthetically pleasing. I mean, come on, we're in Italy. There's good art, But anyway, but what it shows is grotesque. So you have the Archbishop who makes an appearance in the painting, in this writhing mass of nude bodies. You've got another priest who is, you got this pretty stereotypical heart tattoo with an arrow through it. I mean, that's kind of a cliche in the gay imagery. And then you got Jesus in the image in a way that's, in the context, it's compromising and suggestive. The images that the article provides, they're not comprehensive. They have close-ups of a few areas, and then kind of a zoom out of the whole thing. But the writer describes it as Jesus is carrying, I'm going to quote right now, carrying nets to heaven filled with naked and semi-nude homosexuals, transsexuals, prostitutes, and drug dealers, jumbled together in erotic interactions, end quote, and that, quote, the image of the Savior is painted with the face of a local male hairdresser. His private parts can be seen through his translucent garb, end quote. I mean, this is disgusting, blasphemous stuff.
Yeah.
And the artist claims that the Archbishop and the other priests who worked with him, and that priest, by the way, died, and the artist suggests in this interview that priest may very well have been gay himself. He doesn't, out him, but he says, he was very open, whatever that means. Finally stopped, they finally stopped the artist from going so far as to paint people actually having sex in the scene, in the church, on the wall. And why? Not because it's wrong, but because, well, quote, I'm going to quote him again, the bishop and Father Leonardus told me they didn't think it was necessary to arrive at that extreme to demonstrate the freedom that man, in reality, has in this world and the next.
Oh, dear.
And the artist says explicitly, yes, the image has an erotic intent, and there it is in this Catholic cathedral, and it's still there. It was not taken down by the people who came after him, and now you've got Paglia heading up institutes for marriage and family in the Academy for Life. What the heck?
I wanted to talk about that when you sent that to me, because probably art is one of the few things I'm qualified to talk about, because I do have my degree from UC Berkeley in art history. So I
forgot about that. Yeah, so you're kind of an art guy.
Yeah, and there's another reason, because I think this leads into a major issue. And I looked at the painting. I mean, the guy is a competent artist. Not particularly talented, I'd say. But it's sort of mystifying, because I mean, with a work like this, you're dealing with somebody who's commissioned it, and I don't understand what the communication was between the artist and the Archbishop. I think this sort of speaks, and I want to, if you let me talk about this in a minute, to sort of the cluelessness of some prelates here. I mean, dealing within the homosexual milieu, because we've got a gay artist here, and but I mean, there is some historical foundation for the themes that he was playing with. I mean, if you look at Michelangelo's The Last Judgment that's in the Sistine Chapel, or like Luca Signorelli's Last Judgment, there's sort of that imagery he was playing with.
Yeah, but it was kind of creepily reminiscent while being porny at the same time.
Oh, it was. It was explicit in a way that those other works weren't. And you're right. To me, it was pornographic. It was vulgar, and it was ugly. And let me mention, there's good religious art. There's a guy named Noah Buchanan, and I don't love all his work, but he did a piece of a painting of Saint Maria Goretti that's just gorgeous. And then there's another guy, he's an LDS painter, he's Mormon, Joseph Brickey, and his work is phenomenal. It's beautiful. So I mean, this stuff can be done well. But I want to talk about a larger point, and this is where you get into the issue of accompaniment, because to a certain degree, this Archbishop, by hiring this gay man, this gay artist, I think it speaks to this issue, because when you take on even in a situation like this, which is a professional sort of relationship between somebody commissioning a work of art and somebody who's painting it, what are you taking on here? And I think there's a naivete here on the part of bishops, like saying, because according to that article, there were other people that applied for the commission, and it's sort of like, well, let's have the gay artist paint this altar.
But are you saying that you think this is sort of like a token thing, or
no?
Like, hey, look at us, we're cool, we hired the gay guy?
No, I don't think it's. I guess I'm not articulating it well. But what I'm saying is that there are priests and bishops who don't understand that what the homosexual world is like. So by hiring this fella to paint this, it just opens up a whole world of strangeness, and you see it in the painting of this bizarre sort of background stuff going on. And I think, and I'm going to tie this back to these LGBT ministries, because I think there's a certain cluelessness there, that they're trying to accompany, these people, and I don't think they understand, like, how far are you going to take it? I mean, this painting took it pretty far, where it was like a homoerotic, weird, sort of thing. But then I
think it was an accident? I mean, do you think that it was just that they didn't know what they were getting themselves into, or was this intended? I mean, the artist says that they met with them 3 times a week to go over everything, and that he felt that he was never allowed to really work alone on the image, because they were there every step of the way. I sense some intentionality here.
I guess it's a way of, I guess I feel better thinking that they're just, thinking that they're just oblivious rather than it was intentional, because I don't understand how people in the church, bishops, priests, lay people, think they can take this issue on in sort of this Pollyanna kind of approach, and not thinking that there are larger forces at work here. I mean, I don't understand how he hired this guy and thought, well, because there's this stupid postmodern kind of theory that, well, you can separate the artist from his work. And I mean, you can't do that. And it's kind of like when you're trying to accompany people who have really bought into the homosexual lifestyle, you really can't, at the beginning, at the initial stages, you really can't separate them from what they've given their life over to.
I would like to propose an alternative.
You see where I'm going?
Think of this. I do. But what if what we're really dealing with here is that he has his own, it raises the question, does he have his own level of involvement in this whole scene? And is that why he wants to express it? That it's not just about accompaniment, that it's not just about, hey, we'll hire this guy and maybe we can help him out or whatever. But the level, as we talked about earlier, of homosexuality within the clergy, of active homosexuality. I heard a rumor that a cardinal who recently visited Rome, whose name everybody would know, but I can't reveal because it was a private conversation, said that the level of homosexual activity going on in the Vatican is the worst he's ever seen right now. And that, to me, there's an intentionality in this. You don't put something like this up and you don't leave it up, by accident because you're trying to be nice to a guy. Because you're hoping that he's going to come to Jesus. I don't think that that's what's going on.
I guess I didn't mean it so much that way, but I guess you're right, and that's a scary place for me to go. I think there's two forces at work. I think there's people that are taking a very benevolent attitude towards the whole homosexual issue, and thinking that if I'm just nice to these people, they're going to come around. Mm-hmm. Or I can just, there's really no other darker sort of forces at work here. So this artist, though, even though he, works within this very sort of homoerotic genre, it's not really an issue. And I think that's a force within a lot of these ministries, because let's just take example in New York City, for example. You've got 3 different ministries at 3 different parishes. One is headed by a woman who just literally sings the praises of the LGBT community. She was at the LA Congress. And then you've got another one that is headed by a gay man who's married to his same-sex partner. And then you've got another one that is headed by a man, a performer who occasionally appears in drag. So these people have all been put in charge of these ministries, and whoever is controlling this thinks that that's not an issue. It's just part of our accompaniment of these people, no matter, and they use this word messy a lot, no matter how messy their lives are, we're just going to be there for them. But it's so simplistic.
I wish I could have people hear me shaking my head, because it's just stopped for the last 30 seconds.
This is true. All those examples I gave you.
I believe you.
Yeah. So, it's so simplistic, and then with this accompaniment becomes very facilitating. But I think you are right that there is another flip side to this, where you have people who are personally, who are personally invested in this because of their own inclinations.
And we've talked about how it distorts their conception of of themselves and of what's appropriate. I mean, we had that whole surreal otherkin conversation earlier. Yeah. You ask, how can something like this, I think what happens is if you're in this world long enough, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but your judgment doesn't really come out intact. There's an extent to which that happens to anybody who lives long enough in mortal sin, right? The more you've lost the life of grace in your soul, the farther you are from making good, wholesome decisions. And I think sometimes what happens here is these guys know that they kind of have to be one step removed from being completely overt and out there and proud, right? But they do this stuff that signals it, and it's like this open secret kind of thing. And whereas prudence would dictate, hey, that's going to get me in trouble, they don't really care about that. Did you know, I don't know if you know this or not, but the guy who is the administrator of the papal household and was, at least for a time, I don't know if he still is, the liaison to the whole Vatican Bank reform issue for Pope Francis is a guy by the name of Monsignor Battista Ricca, who is a known homosexual. There were encounters when he was in Latin America, stationed there. I forget what his role was, but where he was caught with the rent boy in the elevator. There was some other stuff. I mean, pretty open, pretty obvious stuff. This is the guy that Francis has chosen to run the Domus Sancta Marta, where he lives. He is the guy about whom, and I didn't realize this until very recently, is the reason why Pope Francis did the famous "Who am I to judge?" It was because a reporter, when he was on the plane coming back from Brazil at World Youth Day, the first year of his pontificate, the reporter asked, "What about this Ricca guy?" And he said, if a priest, has goodwill and loves the Lord, who am I to judge? That's where it came from. It's his own guy, his own hand-picked guy who's still there. So these are people in high places. And it really concerns me because the infiltration seems to be really significant.
Yeah, that honestly, that scares me. That whole.
It should.
Yeah. And I don't want to get into a lot of particulars, but I have, let me tell you this, because my relationship with the Catholic Church has been kind of a rocky one. Mm-hmm. And the most wonderful, holy men that I have met in my life have been in the Catholic Church. The most wicked, evil, ugly men I've ever met have been in the Catholic Church. And I don't say that, I don't say that casually, because I was into some pretty dark scenes mm-hmm. in the gay world. But I've met some really creepy people in the Catholic Church, and it's made me step back and just, it's depressing. It is depressing.
It is extremely depressing. And in a way, it makes sense. I mean, right? Because where it's that whole, wherever there's good, there's going to be evil. Wherever good is being accomplished, the devil is going to be right there trying to dig it out.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to leadership. I've just butted heads with the bishops, asking them. I mean, in just some small way, because sometimes I've asked for things that seem so rational, like don't have a gay guy who's very flagrant about his boyfriend on Facebook in charge of this LGBT ministry, where supposedly, possibly young Catholic men and women could go to him for help. Don't have him in charge. But they won't do it. And
that seems pretty common sense.
Yeah. So it's just, if they won't get a handle on these things that are so basic, how can we expect them to tackle these larger issues of gay priests?
That's a question for the ages.
I just don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. It doesn't look good to me. It's almost like the gay priest boy sex abuse scandal was just like part one, and I think there's going to be a part two. And I think it's centered around these ministries that have gotten out of control.
That is a terrifying thought.
Yeah, I think, and it's almost like the Trojan horse. It's like it's just rolled in, and they have these people involved in all of these outreaches, and it's just sick, and I don't see anything good for it. I think it's just all, I don't know. I don't know.
Let me ask you this, because I mean, it's hard to be in this position where, you know, here we are, we're talking about this because we're trying to understand it and what we can do, and we don't have answers. And this seems to be more and more the case with all aspects of the crisis in the church. You just find yourself kind of stuttering and just, I don't know what to do next. But your work continues. And the last time we talked, you mentioned to me how your message is very often rejected throughout the institutional church. Do you know what it is that they don't want to hear? And on the other side of that, what can our listeners do? You know, what do you want them to know? Can they help you with your mission, which is so much more significant than so much else that's being done, of telling people you're not born that way, you don't have to be gay. You know, we're not going to accompany you in this. We're going to bring you home. Yeah. This is sort of a two-sided thing. That is your message, and they don't want to hear it. Why don't they want to hear it, and what can we do? Yeah.
What they can do is they can follow, you know, my blog, because when I am made aware of really flagrant sort of abuses in these ministries and in these gay-controlled parishes, I do let people know about it. And I have another friend that works in a chancery office, and he told me that when a lot of people call up a bishop on the same topic, they do take notice. They do.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, they do notice. Now, if somebody writes a letter and they get one or two letters separated by days and weeks, you know, that's no big deal. But like a lot of times, when I do try to make people aware of what's going on, it's always LA, San Francisco, or New York City. When I do let them know, I say, please call the bishop and tell him to knock this off. And if a lot of people just flood in and call and say, hey, I'm concerned about this, they will notice. And if it keeps happening over and over again, you know, it's going to have some sort of impact. So that's one way. And of course, just pray, you know, and sacrifice, and make some sort of reparation for all this craziness going on. Because it's not, you know, the church, you know, we always hear from a lot of these bishops and priests, we want to dialogue and discourse and accompany homosexual people and people with same-sex attraction. But, you know, the truth has to be involved in that in some way. What they're peddling is a mercy that is shallow, and it just leaves people stuck. And
it's not even mercy. It's not.
It's a false,
mercy means it's helping someone, you know, doing what's best for them. Mercy is not giving sugar to a diabetic. Mercy is not telling somebody who's living in a life that's destroying their soul to keep going, and we'll just be there with you.
It's a false sort of compassion, and you know, the Holy Spirit always works with me in this ministry, and I'm always sort of amazed, because and we started with the LA Congress. I guess we could finish with it. But when I was at the LA Congress, I saw Archbishop Gomez being interviewed, and there was a ton of people around him. And I said, boy, because I had my flyers, I said, boy, I'd love to talk to him and give him one of these flyers. And I hung around, and I just didn't get to talk to him, so I left. Well, I walked back in to the big exhibit hall, this massive exhibit hall, and there was Archbishop Gomez standing there. And I was like, dear Lord, Holy Spirit, St. Joseph, Our Lady, thank you. And I walked up to him, and I said, and I was just bold, but polite, And I just said, Archbishop Gomez, I said, here's a flyer. I said, these people that you have speaking on the LGBT issue today have made public statements which are not in line with Catholic teaching. And I just said, this is not fair. This is confusing. I said, you are presenting one point of view here. And I said, I don't care if these people speak here. I don't like them. I don't think they should speak. But shouldn't you at least have another point of view here? Shouldn't you have someone that's willing to stand up and uphold Catholic teachings? And I told him that. Now, and now it's up to him. I can't really recall what he nodded his head a lot.
Sort of a genial thank you, and that's it.
Yeah, he was very cordial, and he nodded his head, and he said, I'm looking into this, and I'm looking into it. He didn't deny it. He didn't say, well, no, Joe, you're off track here. I don't know what you're talking about. And I had written, I'm always amazed by people who know me, and I had written to him before, and he said, oh, yes, I know you. You have written to me before. and I said, yes, Archbishop. And he said he was looking into it. So, the rubber will hit the road next year. Let's see who he's got on the lineup in 2018. Is he going to have these same tired gay advocates up there? Or is he going to have somebody from Courage or somebody that's willing to speak the truth on this issue?
So the website is josephsciambra.com, correct?
Yes,
and it's Joseph, and the last name is Sciambra.
Yes.
josephsciambra.com.
Yeah. And they can also buy my book, and that's at swalloweddbysatan.com, because that's
swalloweddbysatan.com.
That's the title of the book, yeah. And then I have
sounds like light reading for a Friday night.
Yeah. Well, hey, you know what? I was trying to wake people up and tell them that homosexuality is not just like heterosexuality. It's a completely different world that people are getting involved in. And then I'm also trying to start an outreach for men with same-sex attraction, and that's the Sons of St. Joseph.com.
He's a good patron.
Yeah, and then he's our patron. And what I'm offering or trying to offer to men is that those who are chaste already, but they want to move beyond the orientation. They want to be healed. They don't want to be just a chaste gay guy or a chaste guy with same-sex attraction. They want to be a chaste man who has other options available to him and is healed of homosexuality, because the church is not saying that you cannot have a loving relationship that involves physical intimacy. You can have that. You can just have that with your wife in a marriage.
Right.
So the church is not denying you anything. They're not denying you anything.
It's not a question of equality. Everybody is allowed to marry. You just have to marry someone of the opposite sex.
That's exactly it. I love it. So,
you're a good man, Joseph.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. God bless you, too.
I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. You've been listening to the OnePeterFive podcast. This has been a production of OnePeterFive Incorporated. Copyright 2017. All rights reserved. Please remember to visit us online at OnePeterFive.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider making a tax-deductible contribution to support our work at OnePeterFive.com/donate. Thank you for listening.